Start us with our names. Okay, then we'll get to our Gemara. Okay. Learning sponsors: Sue and Arnie Garlick, in memory of Malka Proman and Philip Mann. Yisrael David ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Beryl ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch. Yosef Meir ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch. Henya Rivka Pro Rosna bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch. And in memory of family murdered in the Holocaust. Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch. Harav Hirsch. Harav Hirsch. Right, Harry and Marjorie Sedell, Irving and Pearl Kaplan. Friends of Avi Gitler, Avrameir ben Shimon, and Martha Gitler, Chana Bad Yeshaya. Children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of friends of Malka Levy, Malka Bat Yosef. Friends of Joe Wolf, Yosef ben Chaim, Charlie Gelfenstein and Sam Levine, in memory of Ramona Levine, Rachel Mata Bat Asher. Friends of Nina Moinester, Nechama Asna Bat Yitzchak. A Month of Learning by Del Budlander. It was actually ending as of this weekend, but we'll just finish it today. His parents, Tzvi ben Yaakov Yitzchak Bela Drash Bat Harav Dober, and his in-laws, Yehuda Tzvi ben David Nachum, Alta Chaya Bas Avram Yosef. Hamel and Haran Haller, in memory of his father, Avram ben Ze'ev. Lynn Rappaport, in memory of her husband, Avram ben Sion HaKohen. A week of learning, ending this week now. Edith and Steve Victor, in memory of her mother, Glickl Bat Avram Yaakov. And Charlie Gelfenstein, in memory of his brother, Shimon ben Meir, ending. Michael and Sharon Glass, in memory of his mother, Rivka Bita Bat Yitzchak HaKohen. Today is the 5th, right? So a day of learning by Aaron Meyerhoff, in memory of his mother, Esther Bela Bas Yehuda Aryeh. And Shama's Heaven Aliyah, Kranker Rafir, Belti Yeshua Shamatzliah, and Lachol B'nai Yisrael, Agrid Gaben Shkia. Amen. Okay. All right. Tomorrow, I'm guessing the earliest we'll start will be at 9 o'clock. Okay. Because of the length of time for the slichas and everything. Okay, so that is based on what the rabbi thinks that's approximately when we would start, maybe a couple minutes afterwards. We'll also have to do a Tarat Nidarim. What we often did as the daf is we came together still, did it for ourselves, and that way we just, 3 guys as a based-in and 1 guy doing it, and then we would just keep rotating, and that way we'd be able to start the daf as quick as possible. Okay? So that's just a suggestion. Okay, I'm going to start today on Daled Amud Beis, okay, about 3 lines from the bottom, okay. Itmar, it was said as follows: Shnei Yamim Tovim Shel Rosh Hashanah. Okay, we have 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. Remember, up to this point, the Gemara was dealing with the question of a Yom Tov, whether it was in Israel or outside. Excuse me. Did it have Yoma Arichta, 1 long period of sanctity, Sorry, or was it two separate periods of sanctity? Okay, so now from that discussion, we can understand why the question is asked about Rosh Hashanah, because Rosh Hashanah is the only occasion in Eretz Yisrael where it is observed 2 days as opposed to 1 day. Okay, so do we therefore consider
the bottom of
right, bottom of Daled Amud Beis? Okay, so therefore it's reasonable that they ask this question. Do we consider Rosh Hashanah then 2 separate occasions, or do we consider it 1 long day? Okay, so that's how we can relate to why this discussion is now continuing. Okay, so that was the question. Rosh Itmar Shnei Yamim Tovim Shel Rosh Hashanah. Rav Shmuel Damra Amrei Travaihu. They said both of them. Nolda Bazeh Asura Bazeh. If the egg is born on the first day, laid on the first day, it's forbidden on the second day, which would imply it's all one sanctity. Yoma Arich, the one long holy day. Okay, keeping that in mind. The Tanan is taught in the right in a Mishnah. Barishona hayu mekablin edut hachodesh kol hayom. Originally, they received the testimony the entire day. Pam echad nishtahu ha'edim levo. One time it occurred that the witnesses were late in coming. V'nit kalkalu, at the top of hay, today's Amud. Sorry. Nit kalkalu halaviim bashir. And the Levites made an error in what psalm they were saying. In other words, for the morning, they may have done the weekday psalm. Okay, but since the Tamid in the afternoon, they had not heard anything about witnesses. They weren't sure whether to do the normal Tamid weekday psalm or the psalm for the holiday. Okay, so that's how I'm suggesting we understand what the problem was.
The bigger problem be the Musa?
That's another. You're right, but that's a separate problem.
They did it.
Because it could be.
If I understood, they did it the first day.
Okay, we're going to. I'm going to answer that. I'm going to answer that. You're right, but a little differently. Okay, what could they have done? All right, since our Mishnah said that they could accept witnesses all day. Okay, so they could have said, okay, it's possible that witnesses will still come and tell us that today is Rosh Hashanah. So therefore we'll do the Musaf, okay, for Rosh Hashanah. All right, and we'll do that, of course, before, because it has to be done before the Tamid. So therefore the Tamid, they're putting off the Tamid to the last minute, so to speak, okay? But still not know for sure, what do we do for that? Do we make the assumption like we did before that witnesses could still come, and therefore today was the first day of Rosh Hashanah, or not? Okay, so I agree with Ruvain's explanation, but just a little different spin on it. Okay, therefore what happens, tells the Gemara, Hitkinu shelo yiyu mekablim et ha'edim ela ad hamincha. So they did this takana and said, okay, up till the time of mincha. Let's say we're talking about mincha katana, okay? Towards late afternoon. We'll take witnesses. If the witnesses don't come from then we'll say, okay, today isn't Rosh Hashanah, it's got to start. Okay? But notice what happens. V'imbo edim min hamincha ulamala. What happens then if the witnesses did come after mincha gedola time, right? I'm sorry, mincha katana time. Ulamala. Nohagim oto hayom kadosh ulamachar kodesh. They would therefore to say, so almost after the fact, all right? Retroactively, I'm going to use that term, say that day was Rosh Hashanah and tomorrow is also Rosh Hashanah, okay? So therefore they declared it two almost separate Kedushot. That's the point that the Gemara is suggesting.
What did the people observe?
Okay, good question. Let's wait and see if the Gemara addresses that. Okay. What happened, however? Ulamachar Kodesh. Amar Rabba. Rabba says, Mitakanat Rabban. Right? Yochanan ben Zakkai. Ve'elech Beitza Muteret. If that's the case, if they are two separate sanctities from the time of that enactment of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, an egg born on the first day would have been laid on a non-holy day, and therefore it's okay to eat the second day. Okay, that's the point, right? Ditznan, as we're taught, Mishacharav Beit Hamikdash. Once the temple was destroyed, Hitkin Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, he made a takana, Shahiyu Mikablin Edot HaChodesh Kol Hayom. In other words, his takana was really, we'll go back to the original minhag of accepting it all anytime during the day. If that's the case, the day is not two separate kedushas, it's one only kedusha. Okay? And therefore, if the egg is laid on the first day, you can't eat it on the second day. Okay? Because it's Yoma Arichta, one long sanctity for both days, if that's the case. Now, Amar le Abaye. Abaye now says, Vaha Ravu Shmuel da Amre Travaihu Beitza Asura. So Abaye challenges Rava and says, but didn't Rav and Shmuel both say that on the egg would be forbidden on the second day, which would imply, right, that they have, right, that it's not the case, right, that it can't eat it the second day, that the first day would not be like a weekday. Okay, Amarle, so Rava responds to him, Amina lach ana, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. I tell you, a takana in the name of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was a Tana, right? Va'at amrat li Rav u'Shmuel, and you cite back to me Rav and Shmuel, who were basically, yes, they were first generation Amoraim, but they can't, you can't compare them to Yochanan ben Zakkai, not only who was a Tana, but he was alive during the time that the Beis Hamikdash was still around. Okay? Right? Ularavu Shmuel, Kashamat Nitin. And if that's the case, then there's a problem with our Mishnah regarding the statement of Rav and Shmuel. Lo Kasha, says the Gemara. No, it doesn't have to be problematic. Ha lan, in one case, one statement applies to us in, right, in Bavel, Vaha laho, and the other occasion applies to them in Eretz Yisrael. Namely, I can argue those that were within the temple precinct close to the Beis Hamikdash, they might have been able to observe one day. But if they were even distant in Eretz Yisrael,
Yochanan ben Zakkai's takana was after the
exactly, right, after the Churban, right. Okay.
So, but they had a different din in Eretz Yisrael and in Bavel.
Bavel, right. Okay. Actually, the implication of the Koran, its explanation was that even if you lived some distance from the Beis Hamikdash in Eretz Yisrael, you still observe 2 days, just like in the diaspora, but only those within the, right, in Yerushalayim, let's say, right, Martin? Okay.
But it would be observed as 2 separate days in diaspora and as one continuous day in Israel.
No, just they would observe only one day of Rosh Hashanah, but other parts of Eretz Yisrael would observe 2 days, which
Where would
is
they-
rather
where-
complicated.
Where would they do one day in Yerushalayim?
Yeah,
And that's, what this, that
well,
would-
that was, but it never, but eventually that was not the case. Okay. So what happens? So Rav Yosef now is going to come back and give a different explanation. Rav Yosef Amar af mitakanat Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai ve'elech beitza asura. Even from the time of Rabbi Yochanan, okay, we say that even though they accepted the testimony the whole day, and therefore you could say, and if that's the case, that all we're talking about is right
Yom Echad.
one day. What was the reason? Have davar shebaminyan. We say it was a situation established by a vote, right? The whole davar shebaminyan tzarich minyan acher lahatiro. And any time we have an example of something that is decided by a vote of the Beis Din, you need another vote to nullify or change it. Okay. Now we know today, of course, we follow a minhag later that said only a Beis Din larger in number and greater in authority can change an earlier Beis Din's vote. But notice it doesn't say that here. All it's saying is that if there was a vote taken clearly, and the only way it can be changed is by another vote. Okay.
So in other words, we're saying that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made the Gezer on his own, or it wasn't his best.
We'll see. Let's see if the Gemara comes back to it. All right. And now Rav Yosef's proof. Dichtiv. Why? We have an example. In the Torah, we have a pasuk that tells us, Lechem or lehem, shuvu lachem v'ohalechem. We have a pasuk that says that the Jewish people were told to go back to their tents. That's euphemistically telling us that they can return to have relations, husband and wives. Va'omer, and I'm going to say this here, and actually another pasuk told us earlier, what? Emor lehem, right? Va'omer, b'msho chayovel, hema ya'alu bahar. At the sound of the shofar, they will go up onto the mountain. In other words, when that shofar sounded to tell them to go up to Har Sinai, they were supposed to stop having relations so that both men and women would be tahor. Now, what do we have then? We have one pasuk that tells us clearly stop the relations. We have another pasuk that tells us, okay, you can go later, go back and have relations. All right? That's what the Gemara is, Rav Yosef is explaining. Vitanya, and therefore we have a Braita that teaches another example. Kerem Ravai, Haya Oleh Yerushalayim, Mahalech Yom Echad, B'kol Tzad, V'zohi Tchuma. We have a Braita that tells us in another example, 4th year vineyards, okay? The produce from those that were in a day's walk of Jerusalem, okay, needed to be brought to Jerusalem, all right? From what areas? Well, the following is the determination, right? From Alat min Hatzafon, from the town of Alat in the north, Va'akravat min Hadarom, and the town of Akravat from the south, Lud min Hama'arav, the town of Lud from the west, Vayardain min Hamizrach, and the town and the Jordan from the east. In other words, all of that area would be a 1 day's journey to Jerusalem, and that produce had to be brought. Va'amar Ula, and Ula says V'itema de Rabba bar Barchana, and some say it was Rabba bar Barchana who said, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan explained Was this Braita telling us this? Matam, what was the reasoning? Kadei la'ater shukei Yerushalayim b'peirot, in order to adorn the marketplace of Jerusalem with fruits. Okay. Now, we're trying to give this as a second example to the proof by Rav Yosef. Okay, namely, and we're seeing now for Tanya, and a Braita teaches, Kerem Ravai, Hayalo Rabbi Eliezer, that Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus had this fourth year vineyard, B'mizrachlo, on the eastern side of Lud, B'tzar Kfar Tabi, near the town of the village of Tabi. Okay, and what happened? So he would be required to bring this produce to Jerusalem, right? So what
But
happens?
Rabbi Lezer, he was living at the time of the
But he was a student of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So he would need to.
But there was no Yerushalayim to bring it.
Whoa, we're going to get to that. Exactly.
I mean,
So what happens if it's after the destruction of the temple? Why would you want to bring produce to beautify the markets of Jerusalem for the conquerors? Right? It wouldn't make sense. Okay. Now, what's interesting is there's a slight difference of explanation here. According to Corin, he wanted to bring it, okay? He couldn't bring it, the fruit, because the temple was destroyed.
Right.
According to Art Scroll, as we're going to see, they follow the text of the Gemara as we go over to the next Amud by saying he wanted to give it to the poor because then he wanted to make it hefker, so the poor could take it and then they could bring it to Jerusalem. But it's a little difficult there, okay, because why again would you want to bring it to Jerusalem and decorate it for the sake of the conquerors? Okay, but the Gemara goes on Amud Beis and tells us, "Ubekesh lahafkiro la'aniyim."
here in Rabbi, the din is that the fruit from the fourth year had to be brought to
Jerusalem
be eaten.
to be eaten.
That
So the implication was he could make it hefker to the poor. They could then take it, they could bring it and then eat it in Jerusalem. Okay, so that would be the case, right? So maybe it has nothing to do with the adornment of the markets.
what the Gemara is going to say farther on is that if the Torah is telling you have to bring the fourth year produce, what is the issue here?
Okay,
Because
right,
Kerem Rabbi is not like Meister Sheni. Meister Sheni has
Could
to
be redeemed.
But Meister Sheni could be redeemed. So you redeem the produce in your town, you bring the coin to your shrine.
but we're going to see in a moment what happens, right? Exactly. So what happens though? So that was good, Ruvain, that you show that, pointed out that difference between Kerem Ravai and Maser Sheni, because what we're going to see is the following. Amrulo Talmidav, the students of Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus come to him and they say, Rebbe, right? Kvar nimnu alayich chavarech vehitiruhu. Your colleagues already came together and they made a correction, a takana, whatever way we want to call it, and said, we'll make Kerem Ravai like Maaser Sheni, where you can redeem it for money and then bring the money to Jerusalem and eat the food there. Okay, so the Gemara asks, Man Chavarech, who were his colleagues that decided that? Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was his teacher, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai.
That's only when the Beis Hamikdash was Kaim, right?
Oh, well,
When the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, the whole thing was off.
right? Tama, what's the reasoning? The Nimnu. So here Rav Yosef is saying, see, here again, I gave you an example of the shofar blowing that permitted the relations. You had to stop, then you had to begin. So according to Torah, there had to be a clear act that designated a change in status. Now I'm giving you a second example that the rabbis did with Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, also where they took a vote, and therefore that tells you, that's my proof, that there needed to be some sort of a decision, a vote. Okay, so let's go on now. Right, everybody with me? All right, so Rav Yosef is trying to give first a biblical proof to his argument, and then a rabbinic proof to his argument. Okay, why? Tamna nimnu. Ha lo nimnu, but if they hadn't voted lo, it wouldn't have worked. So the Gemara asks, Ma'i va'omer, what do they mean then when they say, and they said, Hachi ka'ama, this is what it means to tell us. Michdei, since, kativ, it's written. Okay, now we're coming back to that biblical example that he gave. Hayu nechonim l'shloshet yamim al tigshu el isha. Be prepared for 3 days that you don't approach a woman. In other words, that's telling us that before they went up in Har Sinai, they needed to refrain from relations. Okay, lech emor lehem shuvu lachem lelohechem. And then afterwards, we have another pasuk that then tells us, go back to your tents, which we said euphemistically said they could go ahead and back to having relations. So there had to be a clear statement, act, designation. Okay. Lamali, what is that necessary?
Because since the first pasuk said 3 days, the 3 days were already up. Why did Torah have to tell you another pasuk? It's mutter
Right.
to tell you that even though
Exactly. That's what we're going to see.
Right.
All right. If the pasuk is why the verse then that tells us specifically to go back and it's permissible to have relations. Shma mina kol davar shebeminyan tzrich minyan acher lahatiro. That anything that was done by in this case, let's call it a count, a vote, a act that changed the status. Similarly, another act has to come as well to permit it. So the Gemara says, hold on a second. You gave us, I'm sort of spinning it here a little bit. You gave 2 examples, Rav Yosef. One was from the Torah. One was from the rabbis. V'chitema l'mitzvat onahu da'at. Maybe the reason that pasuk simply comes was to remind the men that they had the obligation of onah, of fulfilling that to their wives. Tashma, however, what is the case? Listen to the following bright. B'mshoch hayovel hem ya'alu bahar. Earlier, the pasuk said, at the time of the Yovel, they would go to the mountain. Michdei, since Ktiv, it's written as well then. Gam hatzon b'habakar el yiru el mula har hahu. Okay, since we have another pasuk that also then says that the animals were not permitted, okay, to go up on the mountain at that time. Okay, that tells me it wasn't just written, and the pasuk didn't come just to tell the men what to do. Lamali, why then did it say there? In other words, why some sort of special signal? Right? Shma mina, davar shebeminyan tzarich minyan acher lahatiro. Again, here's another example from the Torah, a second example that says, since the pasuk told nobody could go up there, and then only later another pasuk says the animals can go back and pasture there, another proof, says Rav Yosef, okay, on this situation. So going on now, v'chi tema, and if we want to say, hani mili b'doraita, aval b'dorabanan lo, so fine, right? Yeah, Abai might come along and argue, so, okay, you gave me two examples based on the Torah, one that applied to the people, one that applied to animals, where both cases you had an earlier verse that said, stop doing something, and a later verse that said, it's permitted to do something. Okay, so, but how do I know that applies to things that are of rabbinic nature? And certainly Reva, right? Kerem Revai is a rabbinic requirement. Okay, Tashma, come and
Karen
listen.
Rabbi is a rabbinic requirement to bring it to you,
Shalayim.
Shalayim. That's
Right.
not a rabbinic requirement, it's meant. So
Okay, so Kerem Revai.
that is a,
Okay, what about that?
right.
Vaha Kerem Revai de Rabbanan. But here we see that is rabbinical. The Ka'amrele. So he said to him as follows. In other words, this is what they were saying to him. In other words, what they were, the students again coming back to what they told Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, namely, Kfar nimnu alecha chavercha v'hitiruhu, that your colleagues already voted and they permitted it. In other words, not just for you, but for other people, and made Kerem Ravai similar to Maaser Sheni, and could be redeemed for money, and that money brought to Jerusalem to fulfill the requirement and eat there in Jerusalem. Okay, make sure that you're okay. Having said that, we now come back to the issue of the eggs. All right. Okay, remember we were trying to draw this comparison. Okay, so what happens? V'chi tema, and if you want to say Beitza Nami, right, with regards to the eggs also, Nami Imanu, Allah Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai Mishayuha, that there also, with regards to the egg issue, they made an account. In other words, they took a vote on it with regards to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and they permitted it. Ki amnu, when they voted, edut, their vote was on the issue of when the testimony could be of the witnesses. Abeitza lo imanu. Regarding the egg, they didn't take a vote to say it would be permitted. Amar le Abai. So Abai responds, Atu beitza b'minyan mihave. Okay, regarding the egg, in terms of any vote, any count, what are we? What's the status then? Okay, so the answer now, this could be Abai's attempted response back to Rav Yosef. Beitza be'edut talia milta, that the whole viability of eating the egg, doesn't that depend on the question of testimony as to whether that is a day, the first day is a holiday or not, is sanctified or not. If you say the first day is sanctified, then an egg laid on that day can't be eaten the next day. Okay, because it's one sanctity. If it's not, it's not. Okay, so what happens?
I thought the entire thing regarding the grapevine, comparing that to the egg, was to draw some kind of analogy with the grapevine. I'm disappointed that it didn't go there, because I thought that maybe we were going to be talking about the fact that on a grapevine, on a bunch of grapes, the grapes being produced all the time, some being ripe and some being full, and others that are just appearing.
Yeah,
And maybe
no,
that would work the same way
the
as
Gemara
with the egg,
didn't
but it
have there, right? Okay. Apparently, Rav Yosef only wanted to use the example, okay, and the story to clarify his position of the voting of the count. Okay. So what happens? He says, "Beitza be'edut talia milta," right? Namely, itzar edut, when they prohibited the testimony. In other words, when they made the limit and said it could only be up to mincha, that was the point. Itzar beitza. Therefore, the egg would be forbidden as well. Ishtare edut. When they went back and made the takana and said witnesses could come the entire day, and therefore, even retroactively, they would declare that day Rosh Hashanah and make it holy, and the next day also holy, right?
Even after Mincha.
Right? Yeah, even after mincha, right? Ishtare beitza. Then the right, then the egg would be permitted. Okay. All right. So now we're going to see another challenge to Rabba's permission of the egg on the second day. Okay. And this will continue us a bit. Rav Ada v'Rav Shalman, the two of them, Travaihu mibei kaluchit, from the same town apparently. Amrei, they said, Af mitakanat Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai ve'elech beitza asura. Even from the takana of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, we will say that that egg is forbidden. Okay, my tama. What's the reasoning? Mehera yibaneh beit hamikdash. May the base hamikdash be rebuilt quickly. Okay. Vayomru, they said, Eshtakad. Last year, the people would be saying, Mi lo achalnu beitza biyom tov sheni. Didn't we eat the egg on the second day? In other words, if it was two separate sanctities, okay, and you weren't sure whether that was the first day, maybe the first day, maybe it was only a weekday. And so that egg laid that day, the next day could be eaten. Hashta naminocha. Now this year too. Okay, let's say we should be able to eat it. Velo yade, but they didn't know. The eshtakad shtei kedushotein, that the previous year, each day was a separate kedusha, right? Vahashta kedusha achati, but now it's considered one long sanctity, and therefore an egg laid on the first day is not permitted to be eaten, cooked, whatever, on the second day. Ihachi, if that's the case, says the Gemara, edut nami lo nikabel, then maybe they should not, today even also, maybe we should not accept any kind of testimony. Okay, my tama, what's the reasoning? Mehera yibaneh beit hamikdash. May the base of Mikdash be built soon. V'yomru, they said. Again, people might think, Eshtakad, milo kibalnu edut hachodesh kol hayom kulo. Last year, we were able to accept a testimony the entire day. Hashta nami nikabeh. Here now, we should also be able to receive it. Hachi hashta, says the Gemara. How are you going to compare that? Hatam, there in that case, edut mesura lebeit din. Okay, namely, the testimony was delivered into the hands of the court. Okay, the Beit Din knew what to do.
They know there's a difference
okay.
between last year and this
Right,
year.
they would be aware of the fact that one needed to make that distinction between the fact that, okay, but what happens? Beitza l'chol mesura. Egg goes over to everybody. Okay, and are they going to remember that there was a distinction the average person might not remember regarding the egg? Okay, whether there was a distinction between Rosh Hashanah being one long or two separate or things like that. Okay, so what happens? Rabba Amr, says Rabba, Af mitakanat Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai ve'elech beitza asura. Right? Okay, so in other words, here too, again, we're saying from the time of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, once more, the egg is going to be forbidden. Mi lo mode Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, she'im bo edim min hamincha ulamala. But didn't we say that Rabbi Yochanan is going to acknowledge that if the witnesses came after Mincha, right? Shinahagim oto hayom kodesh ulamachar kodesh, right? That both days would therefore be sanctified. Okay, isn't that the case? So the tekana ought to apply, okay, regarding the egg, all right? In that case of two kedusha, va'amar Rava, and Rava says hilchata kivate the Rav, bahani tlat bein lekula bein lechumra. But we say here in this case that the halacha is like Rav. It's one of the three cases where with Rav arguing with Rabbi Yochanan, we follow Rav in this case, whether it's stringent or it's lenient, and therefore, as a result, we would still say that the egg would be forbidden in that case. So we're going to stop there, and we'll pick up tomorrow. Amar Rava, right? Mate b'yom tov rishon. What happens then? Okay. So, as I said, the 7 o'clock tomorrow morning is the davening. Okay, and we'll try to start approximately 9 o'clock. So, all right. Okay. Harvey, everything okay? All right, he left.